Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. While we give it just another minute or two, um, here is a prompt to think about before our presentation. So, if you can think of a situation where you felt highly motivated, determined to complete or achieve something, and what about that situation helped you feel motivated and why? How did it feel? If you can think of any emotions that you might use to describe it, anything like that. And then if you can also think of a situation where you felt the opposite, very unmotivated, where maybe you just didn't have the desire to do anything, you were really dreading something. What made you feel unmotivated like that and why? And how did that make you feel? Okay, so thank you for joining me today. I hope the conference has been going well so far. And I would love to talk to you all today about why laziness might be a myth. So to get started, the overview is we'll go over the background on fundamental attribution error, which you may have read the description of this session that includes a little bit of info on that, and motivation theory. We'll have a discussion. We'll do an activity around something called the theory of margin. And then I've got some tips and extra resources to share for anybody who is interested in diving into this content just a little bit more. So, fundamental attribution error is something related to correspondence bias. When we attribute meaning or an explanation to someone or something, we can do that in kind of one of two ways. So, if we attribute the explanation of something to a person, it's dispositional. And if we attribute the explanation to the situation, situational. So, fundamental attribution error describes a bias that oftentimes, if something happens where another person, does something that either is inconvenient or frustrating, maybe they're late to something, we can have a tendency to kind of blame them rather than the situation. Whereas if we're the person who is late, we are more able to see the reasons, right? The situational explanation as to why we were late. So, as you might imagine, this can get kind of tricky when it can kind of compound on itself. So, if we've labeled other people as we've attributed something to their disposition, even if it was incorrect, we might still continue to use that idea of this person is lazy, this person doesn't care, this person is disrespectful. We might continue to see their future behaviors and communication as further evidence of that disposition that we assign to them, even if our original attribution was completely false. So, why I think this ties into motivation is I think understanding a little bit of the background and science of motivation can kind of help us to reduce maybe some of these harmful effects of fundamental attribution error. So we'll start out with some of the basics. A lot of people are familiar with extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic, you can think of it external to you. Oftentimes it's a means to an end. So this could be, recognition for something like kind of external validation. It could be to get a promotion, could be to get a degree. We also have obviously a lot of social needs. It's a very normal and human thing to want to be liked by people and to want to feel like we have the approval of others. And so extrinsic motivation is often those are some pretty common examples. Intrinsic motivation is a type that comes from within ourselves. So this can be that having autonomy over something is really motivating. Or you'll notice there's mastery and challenge similar across these bottom two bullets, where that can be really motivating also, getting better at something, improving at something, and kind of having curiosity about it. Novelty can be really motivating because you want to understand something. So these are kind of the first two kinds of motivation that are some of the most basic. Then there also is something called motivational goals. So this can be more of a structured way of thinking about a particular thing, that a particular goal that motivates us one way or the other. So mastery again is kind of on this list of the enjoyment of learning something, the enjoyment of getting better at something. Failure avoidant, you can be motivated by the desire to avoid failure. So this is actually a very common one where feeling like you might fail at something or feeling like you might make a mistake, that something is not going to go as you desire, might result with you feeling very motivated to avoid that thing. So on the outside looking in, someone might call you lazy or unmotivated, that you don't want to do something, when really kind of the opposite might be happening, that you're motivated by avoiding a particular feeling, excuse me, of failure. Performance is another one. So wanting to get some kind of end result, a test score would be a great example in sort of the realm of education. And then social, so kind of similar to how they were broken into extrinsic and intrinsic. um, Social is another one that comes up in this list too, of valuing acknowledgement from other people, and desiring to kind of have that approval. So with that in mind, does anybody have any of the motivational goals from that last slide, and I can go back to it, that resonate with them in particular? You can either kind of think about this to yourself or feel free to share if you'd like to. Here were those motivational goals. My second question would be, which of these motivational goals do you think might affect students? I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing, but I think someone might have said all of them.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think failure avoidant, times where I've kind of covered this topic in other sessions and other discussions, failure avoidant is one of the most common ones that seem to come up for people, of realizing how much either themselves or their students might feel, yeah, like the failure avoidant one really resonates. And performance, of course. Just in a moment, we'll talk about how grades can kind of be wrapped up in performance and failure avoidant motivational goals.
I think the students that I've been interacting with, in my failure avoidant and performance are the two key ones. I think it's the exceptional student who's concerned about mastery. That is my experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I could say that some students are actually a really interesting hybrid or combination of like some of your best students want the mastery, but they also come to see you 1,000 times more than your non-higher performing students because they're also failure avoidant.
Mm. And I've heard from many people in pretty much any position in really any institution, at the really noticeable increase in student anxiety in recent years. And I can only imagine that that would probably further drive some of these, kind of negatively experienced motivational goals, that it would probably increase those. Well, thank you all. It's always really interesting to see, yeah, what stands out to people and what they may see as affecting their students. So this is that slide I was referring to with motivation and grades. I highly recommend checking out materials on ungrading. It can feel like a pretty daunting idea, or especially a daunting task to actually implement, but removing grades can be a wonderful way to help your students sort of mitigate some of that failure avoidant nervousness, and the performance motivational goal, to maybe help restructure that in a little bit more positive way. So grades often really impede motivation. Seeing kind of the final mark of something can feel, on the student end, like that's kind of where that progress ends. I tried something, I got the grade, the end. Whereas a lot of times, we want students to continue to try, continue to learn, continue to grow and expand on maybe where they started in the class. If there's something difficult for them, throughout the class. So feedback without a grade is actually the most effective way to encourage students to do this process, to keep learning and to push past difficulties and mistakes. I found this to be so fascinating. When feedback is given alongside grades, it is as ineffective as when only a grade is given. So effectively, a grade renders the feedback useless when students, their focus is going to remain on the grade, on the letter grade, on the number grade. And the feedback is so much less likely to be used to push past those difficulties and make mistakes and learn from them. One small example is for how to address something like this is maybe in a math class, you could offer revisions on an assignment before it's assessed for a grade. And I think this could apply to many other types of classes rather than just math. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I put this slide in here for anybody who'd like to refer to it afterwards. If you want to just kind of take a moment to scan this, these are some strategies that you can use for these kind of 4 categories: establishing inclusion, developing attitude, enhancing meaning, engendering confidence. And there's also underneath each suggested kind of time frames of the learning session as to when they might be the most effective to use those strategies. All right, so this next part is called the theory of margin. So there is a lot more to this theory if you're interested in looking at it outside of this presentation, but I'll kind of just do the parts most relevant to this discussion. So this idea of margin comes from the difference in our power that we get from internal and external sources and our load, or like the demands on our internal and external power. So you can imagine that if someone on a particular day or a particular week or just a particular time in their life, maybe there's not as much internal or external power that they're finding, and there's a lot of demands on their life. That margin of what's left between the two of them might be quite small or even kind of non-existent on some days. So an example, I've got kind of each quadrant filled out with a couple of examples of what this might look like for a person. So something that internally would give you power, your ability to go through your day and get what you need, could be self-belief. It could be getting good sleep. It could be mindfulness. External power, that might come from your relationships with your friends and your family. If you have engaging projects you like to spend your time on, and that you're able to get good rest and you enjoy your hobbies. Something that might come from an internal source of load or demand is if you have feelings of self-doubt or stress, or maybe you're feeling overwhelmed. External could be your work and personal responsibilities. This could also be any unexpected thing that comes up. If your car breaks down, if you forgot your key, you forgot your ID to swipe in some at work or something. Really anything small that could kind of accumulate. So are there any questions about this? I would love to, on this next slide, have everyone kind of think of even just one example that would go in each quadrant. If you have any questions about this theory or how to do that, feel free to ask. Does anybody have anything that you've been able to kind of identify what category it might go in for you, or any just general thoughts about this concept?
I'd say general thoughts are that this could change on any given day.
Absolutely, very dynamic. And it could be kind of hard to know what this might look like for people without, explicitly asking, when there is so much that can change what this might look like for a given student on a given day, or you on a given day. Does anyone have thoughts on how this might connect to sort of the relationship there could be between this idea and the idea of the fundamental attribution error?
I think building on what was said previously, that it can change on any given day that, let's say you or a student comes in and, I don't know, your car broke down that morning or something. That starts affecting your approach to the day, and so then somebody might encounter you for the first time and they experience you on that particular day, that might set the bias going forward in terms of how they perceive you going into the future.
Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And something that I think is useful in sharing this information with you all is pointing out what you already are kind of sharing, is that it's not necessarily an exact science, and one of the funny things about how our brains can work is, now that if anyone hadn't heard of fundamental attribution error already, or if you have and this was just kind of a refresher, even with that information in your head, it doesn't mean that now that process will never happen again. It likely will. It certainly will. And so, exactly to your point, something that could happen where someone's demands for their day results in a situation where it can be easy to blame that on their disposition, exactly what you just said might set that tone. So having awareness of this won't fix things like this being possible and continuing to happen, but I hope that it can give a little bit of insight that you can use, either proactively, or if you notice it happening, giving you some tools to understand why it might be happening and be able to address it a little bit more, intentionally, or with more consideration for what that person might be doing, or going through, that resulted in whatever the observable outcome of that scenario is. So I'd love to open this up for discussion. What might go in each quadrant for a student that you'd have in a given class? I have some examples I can share. Internal power, and sorry, to back up just a minute, to preface this, I think a lot of this is what, as instructors, as teachers, we can sort of encourage these types of mindsets in our students, of it's okay if I make mistakes. It would be lovely if, students had that coming into the class. It could also be something that, through an understanding of motivation, you might be able to kind of foster that type of self-belief in students, where you can evaluate how mistakes are treated in your class, and encouraging, finding ways to encourage, the self-belief that it's not detrimental when they happen and they're a normal part of the learning experience. And eventually, could that lead to your student having a source of internal power, of comfortability with the idea of making mistakes, and the sorting out what that looks like afterwards. External power, so kind of like what I was just saying, that could be support from instructors, TAs, their advisor, really any person who is in a role of support to the student, could help in kind of solidifying some internal power as well. Internal load could be another form of self belief, where I'm just bad at math. This is a fixed thing. I'm just not good at this. That might be a pretty big hurdle for some people to get over. I would say that's probably highly related to, again, the failure avoidant goals, performance goals, that I don't want to do this thing because I don't think I'm good at it. And I think that the end result will not feel good, to have tried and to have failed. An external load. This is kind of related to the idea of how motivation relates to grades, where getting enough points to pass a class, or to do well enough on an assignment, to get the grade that you want overall, that can also be a source of external load. Does anyone have? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, how is it that, or do you have any recommendations to if somebody's internal load is so high, like it's more powerful than maybe what something external support can give. How do you recommend that we give support to the students if like they are so highly anxious about something and you meet with them, you encourage them, you have other, ungraded sorts of assignments, but you can't seem to break through this anxiety that is such a huge load. Do you have any recommendations on how to address that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that that is the reality for a lot of students, and for a lot of teachers trying to help their students through that. What immediately comes to mind is that when we have sort of wraparound support, where you as the instructor or you as the advisor or you as one person to that student can't fix the entirety of what that student is going through. You can't address the entirety of the internal and external load on that student. And I don't know that I have a, so to say, answer on how to. I think that just sucks. I think as much as we want to help, um, there are so many things that instructors are responsible for. And in this moment of time, in trying to support students through incredibly difficult, um, just sort of years of instability with, the chaos of everything, we're also experiencing that as faculty and as staff. Um, I think wraparound support is one of the best ways that high support and high boundaries seems to really help with maybe someone in I don't want to say crisis. I